All right, everybody. So here we are for the second interview of the new Universal Man interview series, and I'm incredibly happy to have with me Gary Wilson from YourBrainOnPorn.com. Gary is the author of Your Brain on Porn, Internet Pornography, and the Emerging Science of Addiction, and the host of the popular website that I just mentioned. His book has already been translated into 3 languages, with several more on the way, and his TEDx talk, The Great Porn Experiment, has been viewed some 12 million times. He is also the author and co-author of 2 peer-reviewed articles about pornography. So thanks for being here, Gary. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So I have to let everybody know that you were one of the most pivotal people in kind of my awakening around the pornography issue. I remember it was way back in, what was it, like probably 2013, late 2012, when I stumbled across your videos, and I found the whole NoFap community, and just started understanding that there was an explanation to all of the crap I was dealing with, why I couldn't quit porn, why my life felt like I just couldn't get it together and whatnot. And so I just want to start off by thanking you very much for the work that you've done, because you've put a lot of work into this, haven't you?
Yes, I and my wife have put a lot of work into this. It was quite unsuspecting, considering I had no opinion on porn. As I'm very liberal, libertarian, and agnostic atheist, so we had no opinion. But you know the story, but others may not, is that men started showing up on my wife's forum in 2006, and the forum had nothing to do with porn. It was about relationships. And I guess they were attracted to the forum because it had articles about orgasm, and maybe it had certain key words. Anyhow, they started posting and saying, I think that porn is affecting my sexual performance. Can you help me? And she's like, what the heck are you guys doing here? And I guess Google put together their responses, and more of them showed up until it turned into a locker room over the next few years. She eventually, in 2010, said, Gary, could you make a website? So I put up a website, with some science, a few videos, their stories. And it was a pretty small website, and I thought I'd be done, but then it just exploded, and I became sort of this central focus of a lot of the porn recovery, especially for young men. And it's really sort of taken over our lives quite a bit. And it was quite unexpected and in reality quite unwanted. But there you go. Yeah. You don't always get what you want in life.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that a little bit. Like, I never wanted to be, the porn guy on YouTube, but, it just so happened that as I went through this process and I realized, holy crap, this is a big issue, and I think I can help people with it, I was like, all right, I'll put my face on it. I'll talk about it. And then you kind of get sucked up into it, and then you realize, man, people are really suffering from this. And it's like you start to realize this is meaningful and good work. Is that kind of like what happened with you? You started to see the impacts you're having in people's lives, and you're like, all right, I can keep this up.
Yeah, it really was about the impacts. When you get emails saying I was suicidal, I was going to kill myself, because I thought I was ruined for life. I went to medical doctors, urologists, psychiatrists, and I still couldn't even get excited by my girlfriend or a real woman, and there were no answers. That's what really compelled us to put up the website, is really people suffering. And then we found, as time went on, that it was not only sexual problems, but a lot of emotional problems dissipated after giving up porn. Cognitive improvements occurred. They saw their partners differently, and on, many, many benefits. So it was just information that wasn't out there because the studies weren't being done.
Right. Exactly. It's just that's, what I struggled with. I didn't know that stuff growing up. And had I, had that kind of education, similar to how we had drug education growing up, it would have been useful to have porn education, because it is kind of a drug in a lot of ways, the way it interacts with your system and the negative effects. And we just didn't know. We were just told, don't do it because it's bad. I went to Catholic school and everything like that. Yeah, I would say from the more religious perspective, I would say there is a moral component to it, but a lot of times it's the practical, just science of things that is probably most compelling. So,
yeah, and when you grew up, now, how old are you? 28, 29?
I'm 29.
Yep. So, when you grew up, you didn't have
Right.
streaming tube sites when you were 12. You didn't have a smartphone.
I was like that
when you were
weird
12.
straddle age where it's like we moved into the internet age. So it's like we didn't my parents didn't know about it. They didn't know what to expect. Like we didn't develop the sociological kind of safeguards or anything close to it at that point.
Right. And I think your age group, that sort of 27 through 33 that straddles all this technological change, is probably the best equipped to describe reality to the younger people who are now growing up in 2019 with their smartphones and watching porn, in math class. So
Right.
You can just tell them, there's a different reality than just watching porn all the time and masturbating to hardcore porn.
Exactly. And there is. And even though, I started fairly young with that stuff, at least with images or magazines or whatever I could get my hands on, honestly, it was enough to see I saw the progression. I know what I started on was not hardcore, high speed streaming stuff, but that's definitely what I progressed to. And then that's when everything just started, everything just kind of sucked in my life in a lot of ways. And maybe you could give us kind of the Spark Notes version of why porn is bad for you. I don't feel like you got to put the full presentation on, because people, if you're interested in getting all the details, go to yourbrainonporn.com. There's a lot there, but for the people who are new to this concept, why is porn this damaging thing?
Well, yeah, if they want the full story, I have a video I put out in 2015, even though lots of neurological studies on porn users have come out since then. So that would really do the whole shebang. So I think what we have to step back and look at is that internet porn is a unique stimulus, in that, people often say, well, it's like alcohol. If you use some of it, it's okay. But unlike alcohol or gambling or even playing video games, your brain has innate circuits for sexuality and reproduction. These innate circuits can and will be shaped by input. They will especially be shaped and molded by the input during adolescence, from ages 10 to actually 25 when adolescence ends. So that adolescent brain is undergoing tremendous changes. It is actually has billions and billions of connections that will be dissolved and gotten rid of, and your brain will be shaped by the input during adolescence. Your most profound memories and experiences and the songs you love and the sports you like occurred during adolescence. That's when you're shaped. So if you are sitting there from ages 12 to 15, 16, 17, masturbating every day, maybe several times a day, to watching other people have so-called sex, doing it day in and day out, that is shaping your sexual template. It's shaping your sexual template really in two ways. The first way is, this is how I should do it. I should just bang this woman. I should ejaculate on her face. I should slap her boobs, whatever. That's just what she's enjoying, obviously.
Right.
Or the other way is, I need this type of stimulation in order to be aroused. So what is that? I need to watch other people have sex. I need to switch from video to video. I need constant novelty, because novelty increases sexual arousal. I may need something that causes me anxiety or shocks the system or surprises me, because that increases dopamine. Dopamine increases sexual arousal. So what's different about internet porn since 2006 is you can control your sexual arousal, control your reward system activity with the click of a mouse. You couldn't do that prior to 2006. So in other words, it's shaping your sexual template as you use it.
Okay, yeah, and that's where you start getting all these kind of unusual sorts of problems that guys run into. These are the very frantic emails that I get, and I'm sure you get, where guys are like well, obviously you got the sexual dysfunction ones, like, oh, my penis won't work, I can't get attracted to my partner or whatever. But then it starts getting into much more, I would say, disturbing territory, where people say they have these uncontrollable, like very off the wall fetishes, or they have obsessive thoughts about their orientation. They're not sure if they're gay or if they're straight, and they just keep going back and forth between the kind of porn that they watch. They don't know if they're actually just hentai sexual or whatever. And it's like people get very confused because of what you're talking about here, this template manipulation influence that porn can have, right?
Well, yeah, you think back, if you look out into the propaganda, you'll see the opponents, maybe PhD people who are pro-porn, say, well, porn can't shape your sexuality. If you go to my site, you'll see that I have 40 studies listed that support escalation of use or habituation to current porn. In fact, one study from about 3 years ago asked porn users about this, and 50% of them said they are currently using porn that previously they found disgusting or uninteresting. Then there's the whole claim that, well, what you are watching is who you are. Well, that was disproven by another study where 25% of straight men were watching gay porn and 55% of gay men were watching straight porn. So if they're doing that, that's not their sexual orientation. So what they're watching doesn't match their sexual orientation. So that's been debunked. So what you hear out there in the interwebs is just baloney. It is shaping sexuality. Norman Doidge, back in 2007 with his book, The Brain That Changes Itself, had a whole chapter about sexual taste being shaped, because his book was about neuroplasticity, how the brain changes in response to stimulus. And he is seeing patients whose sexual tastes have morphed and they can no longer get excited by real partners. So this is well documented.
Right. And so when you're talking about sexual taste morphing, that's probably not just the end of the line in terms of how porn can affect you. How can it also affect your enjoyment of other areas of life?
Yeah, well, this is one of those things where you really don't know, and the studies really have a hard time finding out unless the individual quits porn. That said, I have these lists of studies on my site, and one of the lists is studies linking porn use to poor emotional or cognitive functioning, and there's 65 of them. Some of those studies had the people remove the variable, about 3 of them. But the point is, what they found is, for example, is prefrontal cortex functioning. It affects the prefrontal cortex, which is behind your judgment, it's behind planning for the future. It's about delaying gratification for future rewards. Remember the old marshmallow experiment?
Right.
And so what they found is porn use really affects multiple aspects of your cognitive function, but also can affect you emotionally. We see that men who give up porn, maybe depression goes away, social anxiety decreases, they become more confident, they want to get out and socialize. So there's many aspects that can be improved if you give up porn, but as you know, you have to give it up for a while.
Right. And it takes a little while, and sometimes things can feel like they get worse before they get better. And I think that in a lot of ways actually speaks to this kind of addiction sort of model where, there's going to be withdrawal symptoms. There's going to be periods where you're actually not going to be doing as well. Now, I remember there was a little bit of information about that when I first got into studying this sort of stuff, talking about like delta phos B and the buildup in the brain. Is there more out there now explaining why we go through withdrawal when guys quit porn and have all these weird stuff happen to them, like flatline and brain fog and irritability and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, what was interesting is there are a few studies that have reported withdrawal. And then about a month ago, a study from Poland asked a bunch of basically college students about porn use. and they found nearly half tried to quit, and almost all of them experienced withdrawal symptoms. So that was like a huge eye-opening study where they finally asked the right question. Then the question is, why would you experience withdrawal? So we think of withdrawal as, well, withdrawal symptoms only occur for drug addictions, right? So let's say you take morphine, and then you get off morphine and you experience withdrawal symptoms, and you're told you experience withdrawal symptoms. This is in the general public because the more morphine you take, it actually downregulates the receptors for morphine. You have your own endogenous opioids that you make, and you get rid of the receptors in your body, and you might have, depression and shakes and aches and pains. Well, as research has gone on, they discovered that all addictions, including behavioral addictions, when you stop, can lead to withdrawal symptoms. And what's really behind it is the change in the brain's stress system. So deep in the limbic brain are regions like the amygdala, the hypothalamus, hippocampus, etc., that control the entire stress system. And the stress system, we think of, cortisol and hormones out in the body, but it's really a lot of neurochemicals occurring in the brain, and then the hormones change out in the body. So in studies, they find when a person quits drugs, certain neurochemicals, one's called CRF, go up in the brain, and this is what's behind feeling like crap, anxiety, inability to sleep. And this chemical called CRF that increases when you quit also decreases dopamine and may decrease opioids, and those are behind motivation and pleasure. So it has a double-edged sword, and at the same time, CRF, when it increases, makes you far more sensitive to cues. So if you open up the computer and normally you use porn, you really start to have strong cravings. So a lot of the new literature is really pointing to addiction as being primary and an alteration of the stress systems, which is fascinating, isn't it?
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me from someone who's worked, made a living in the practical end of helping people quit this, is that, I've realized that the only way that people can really quit, especially if they're having a lot of trouble, is that they need to completely revamp the way that they respond to stress cues. And this is like a holistic thing. It's like everything from, all right, this is what you would do. This is what we got to do now. It's like you would go to porn when you're stressed. Well, now we got to go do this other stuff. But the problem is, like, porn's kind of this one size fits all sort of solution. You can use it to solve, in quotes, any problem. But the solutions, usually you need a whole suite of them because you usually have multiple different kinds of problems that you have to contend with. And so then you got to get into the whole mindset thing and everything like that. But it ultimately comes down to, for most people, just because it's such a catch-all instant feel-good button, they kind of just funnel all their problems and stresses into this one kind of solution. And then when that solution is not working and their life just is getting progressively worse, they kind of reach this breaking point. And that's usually when they probably, either come to me or to you and start trying to get a handle on this thing.
Yeah, I mean, many of your earlier videos I put up on YBOP, we featured you because you had such great advice. And your basic thing is, guys, you got to change your life. You got to change your mindset. You got to do new activities. You probably have to exercise. You may have to meditate. You may have to look at what's causing you problems, because you've just spent the last 10 years dealing with your problems by masturbating to porn, playing video games, and then eating junk food. So you might have to change a few things.
Right. And it's an uphill thing that can take a while, but, ultimately what you get back, or in some cases get for the first time, that's kind of how it was for me. Is like for the first time, like around, honestly, it was like 25, 26. And I think part of that has to do with my brain finally sort of maturing, is like I felt in control of myself. I could live a fully productive day, which was something I could only do anytime prior to that under some kind of external duress, some kind of external deadline, or someone managing me or something like that. I could never actually just be productive on my own. And part of that's probably just immaturity, but I think a big chunk of it was just because my brain was all jacked up from, all the video games and porn and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I just want to point out that there's been about 43, 44 neurological studies on porn users and sex addicts, and all of them support the addiction model. And in that group, there's actually 3 studies that looked at the stress systems of sex addicts, sex and porn addicts. They sort of lump them together sometimes in these studies. And they, again, matched the drug addiction model. They had brain changes in their stress systems that matched those occurring in drug addicts. So this is not unsupported. This is fully supported.
So here's something that I haven't heard talked about, and maybe you can tell me if there's any evidence to support this. One of the big things that I found in doing this kind of work is, obviously there's a lot of talk about dopamine and that sort of thing, but the thing that really started interesting me was the serotonin component of things. I talked to this woman, Dr. Loretta Bruning, who talks a lot about the serotonin system and our perception of status and status hierarchies. And I'm curious if the studies mention serotonin at all, because the way that I see it is a lot of times, like, stress is a calculation that we feel when we feel like either our status is at risk or we've actually lost some status, that we, got yelled at work, or, a girl rejected us, or worried about meeting this deadline or whatever it is. And then what porn offers is it offers this artificial status. You get to step into this kind of fantasy world where you get to be this high status alpha dude having sex with as many women as he wants. And that to me seems more of like a status sort of issue. And what I've found when I work with guys and have them pursuing, more authentic forms of status that they can align with and that sort of thing, that makes a major difference. So I'm curious if you've seen any science that could support that kind of perspective.
Well, I can't say much about serotonin. Most of the addiction studies, whether they look at behavioral addictions or they look at drug addictions, don't get too much into serotonin. I mean, as far as sex goes, serotonin's released, but there's 15 types of serotonin receptors, and each of them have a different effect at the point of orgasm to inhibit sexual arousal. As far as status, there are studies looking at status and dopamine, specifically looking at chimpanzees, groups of chimpanzees. And what they discovered is when they put together groups of chimpanzees, so they measured their dopamine and their dopamine receptors, and they found that before they put them in cages together, or not cages, but groups together, then the alpha, the leader of the pack, eventually emerged, and that leader of the pack that emerged had an increase in dopamine receptors in its brain. So what does that mean? That means it's much more sensitive to dopamine. And what is dopamine behind? Well, dopamine is behind motivation, the motivation to take action. So they're not sure exactly what's going on, but what they also found is then when they take them out of the cage and no one's an alpha anymore, the dopamine receptors return to normal. So there's a change in the dopamine system, and the dopamine system is basically the reward system, the motivation system. Everything you do because of dopamine. Dopamine increases, you go for it. Dopamine decreases, you back away from it. This is just basic biology. And so they have looked a lot more at the dopamine system in terms of these type of behaviors, as far as I know.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, let me know if the studies ever start turning towards serotonin at all, because I'd be interested to see what they say about that. One question I wanted to have for you before I kind of change tracks with you, circling back to something you were saying earlier about when you're giving the introduction, talking about how porn is in particular kind of damaging during the formative times of life, like if you're going through adolescence and that sort of thing. But what about for older guys? Can they use porn in a completely safe manner? I mean, especially if they've, had maybe decades of life without porn before coming across it, can it still affect them adversely?
Absolutely. The reason I emphasize the adolescent brain is because it can have a much more powerful and lasting effect. And we saw this, and we actually started to see this around my TED Talk and afterwards, where the young men, and you know this very well, would often need a year, maybe even 2 years to recover from porn-induced erectile dysfunction, even though they're at their peak of physical condition. They're 25 with high testosterone. Whereas the men in their 50s would often only need 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and they'd be back to normal. However, we started getting reports in the last few years where older men are starting to need a lot longer, into the months. So absolutely, this is a very powerful stimulus. Your brain is meant to engage in sex and reproduce. That's its primary directive, right?
Right.
So it is being shaped. And sexual arousal and orgasm are the highest natural levels of dopamine and opioids. And both dopamine and opioids are messages, and they're messages to learn. And you're then learning, this is very important and I should do it over again. And you're also learning at a neurological level with nerve connections and changes in the structure of your limbic system that this is what turns me on. So you've seen older men who are now turned on by stuff they can't believe they're turned on, and they're now having a hard time getting aroused by their wife or a partner.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to make that clear because, it's bad for pretty much everyone across the board. And, I've actually worked with a number of guys 60 plus years old, even a few 70 plus years old who really struggle with this thing.
Yes.
And even women now. I haven't gotten, since my project's focused on men, I don't get as many of these, but I do get them sometimes. But I know you definitely have collected some reports of women who struggle with porn too. Is that right?
Yes, we collected reports off of NoFap, but that was several years ago. But the recent studies are starting to show a tremendous rise in young women using porn regularly. It used to be very, very tiny percentage of women who use porn regularly. In fact, a nationally representative sample from the early 2000s to mid 2000s was only about 2% of women. But now we're starting to see in the age groups 18 to 30, going into the 20%, 30% perhaps in one recent study. Wow. So it's starting to climb for women quite a bit. And I want to mention something, going back to affecting men. Here's a fact that everyone should know. Every single study, over 60, maybe 65 studies, every single study on porn use in males have found that more porn use is correlated to less sexual and relationship satisfaction. Every study, without exception, on males. So that's pretty significant because you think there'd be at least one study that'd be asking college freshmen, oh, do you use more porn? Yeah, well, no big problem. But every study I can find. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, that is a big deal because that's not the narrative that is often put out about pornography. And this is kind of what I wanted to get into is like, what's been the reception of your work? Because it's, you're kind of, ironically, in this day and age, you're very countercultural in the stuff that you talk about. What do you think about that? What do people say?
Well, there's a lot of different people out there who say a lot of different things. So yes, I and several other people who are so bold to suggest that porn use may lead to problems have been significantly attacked, sometimes in very vicious ways. It happens all the time. In fact, you were actually on Twitter tweeting it underneath someone who went on your thread who's attacking me, calling me a white nationalist and a racist. It's just crazy people.
Yeah, our friend who goes by Nerdy Kinky Kami, he was the one who was criticizing you and calling you a white nationalist and that sort of thing. So, like, what's going on with all of that? I mean, back when I last checked in with you, you had a few people on Psychology Today who would criticize your stuff, and it was pretty much like just not them addressing the argument and saying stuff that just kind of avoiding your points and just like dancing around it and making up their own kind of perception on reality. And I was like, all right, people are going to do that. They've got, confirmation bias and whatnot, but it's completely kind of seems to have shifted. Like it's gotten much more vicious than just, some blog posts that disagree with you. What's going on?
Well, they still avoid any context. Even the PhDs out there who tweet about me or say disparaging things, they never once link to my site. They never take on a single word I say. They never take the studies I cite. So they may say porn use is good for relationships, and they'll cite a qualitative study. Qualitative means they just asked a bunch of heavy porn users if they thought porn was good for their relationships, and they say yes. And then I would cite all the quantitative ones, the ones that actually have data and correlate porn use with relationship satisfaction. And here's 75 studies, and they'll say, oh, there's Gary Wilson again spamming us with studies. Don't look at his fake YBOP site. And it's just a list of studies with excerpts, So this is the way it's been for years, but it has it has really, increased in virulence.
Yeah.
Lots of defamation, lots of personal attacks, lots of behind the scenes emails to organizations. In fact, the latest one that occurred is that a large group of these people, pro-porn PhDs, have tried to steal my URL, have tried to trademark my site, yourbrainonporn.com. So we're in the middle of a legal fight against a group of people trying to steal my URL. They put up their own site, which they call realyourbrainonporn.com. And if you click on the tabs don't say Real Your Brain on Porn, they say Your Brain on Porn. They created a Twitter account, a Facebook account, a YouTube account called Real Your Brain on Porn. And they often tweet underneath me, attacking me personally. They put up cherry-picked studies. They disparage people they disagree with, this Real Your Brain on Porn Twitter handle. They're just amazing. And what was interesting is when they first went online, the very first Twitter account to retweet them was Pornhub. So get that. How would Pornhub know about an account that wasn't online yet? The only way I know of is they were informed by the owners of Real Your Brain on Porn Twitter account.
Yeah.
And so over half of the retweets were people in the porn industry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like when you see something like that, if their first like retweet was Pornhub, it's like, yeah, maybe the owners of the Real Your Brain on Porn message them, or they're the same people. Like that's the way I'm seeing it, is like the porn industry is recognizing that, all right, they're going within the next, I would say 5 to 10 years, the porn industry is going to be a similar position that the tobacco industry was in like the 1950s and 60s and whatnot, where they're going to be kind of on the back foot and the science is blatantly against them. And so what they have is pretty much propaganda and advertising. And right now it sounds like what they're trying to do is pretty much scare you off. And it's kind of disturbing, because I see on one hand a huge financial interest, because obviously the porn industry is a massive industry. But on the other hand, I just see like the grassroots part of the movement is just like people don't want to be told that maybe what they're doing is bad for them. It's like they have this whole cognitive resistance to it. Like there was one somewhere on Twitter, I was like, I just put some studies up or link to your site or something like that, and they're like, excuse me, sorry, I'm looking for facts, not just opinions. I'm like, I literally just linked you to a page full of scientific facts, and you said that you want like I don't understand like what kind of filters people are putting on themselves. But I basically, I'm saying that I feel a lot of sympathy towards you, because there's a lot of people out there who are just being either willfully stupid or just outright malicious, and it's kind of crazy.
Well, it is kind of crazy. It's been going on now for 7 years. Whoop, can't hear you.
I can hear you. You're still good on my end.
Okay, there you go. So something went off. Yeah, so it's been going on for 7 years, and it's expanded from me. You know, they've gone after Alexander Rhodes of NoFap. They've gone after Don Hilton, medical doctor. They go after Fight the New Drug. They go after Exodus Cry. They've gone after, my goodness, they've gone after journals. They've gone after lots of therapists. These people often report therapists, sex addiction therapists, to their state boards with malicious complaints. And of course, the state boards just say, this is baloney. But one of these individuals who's featured on my pages has reported 20, 25, 30 people to their state boards for no reason other than they may have published a paper about porn's negative effects, or they've done a blog post, or they've tweeted about it. It is just insane, the maliciousness that's going on. And it's really supported by a large group of individuals, and most of those individuals are part of the realyourbrainonporn.com website. In fact, that site has a list of its experts up there, and many of them are listed, so you can see who's behind trying to steal the trademark. You can see some of them are behind actually personally attacking, defaming, harassing, cyber stalking individuals such as me and the others I've mentioned. So they really put themselves out in the open now and say, this is us. Here's our name. Yeah. We're going to do this. Try to stop us.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that they're so brazen about it. What are some of the biggest lies that they put forth that, you know, are just kind of the most preposterous and, you know, damaging, do you think?
Well, let's see. The most, one of them, Nicole Prouse, has said that I have physically stalked her in L.A. Of course, I haven't been in L.A. for years, so it's a complete lie. She also said that she filed an FBI report on me. For what, I don't know. Well, I went and did a Freedom of Information request on the FBI, and I found out that there's been no report by Nicole Prouse on a Gary Wilson, or any report. She also said that she filed an FBI report on Alexander Rhodes and NoFap, just tweeted that. He too did an Freedom of Information Act with the FBI and found there was no report whatsoever. There's so many, it would take us about 10 hours to name all the many things that have been said about us. I don't know where you want to go.
No, yeah, that's the kind of idea I was thinking of. What about in terms of like the science stuff? What is like the big kind of misinformation points they put out?
Well, they just simply lie about the science. So example, real YBOP, I got a real YBOP Twitter account. They only post a few cherry-picked studies, outliers that don't represent the preponderance of evidence. So let's go back to that example. Every single quantitative study on males has found that more porn use is related to less sexual satisfaction. So it's 65, 70 studies perhaps. They never tweet those. What they tweet all the time is a study by Taylor Kohut, who's also a member of Real Your Brain on Porn experts. And that one asked couples if they thought porn was good for them. And a lot of them said it was. But here's the interesting thing about the couples they asked. The women in the couples, 95% of the women regularly use porn on their own. 95%. That's much, much higher than college-age men. If you look at nationally representative samples, and the only ones we have are from the mid-2000s, 2.6% of women in relationships use porn at least once a month. And when I talk about maybe several times a week, it probably goes down to 1%. So where did they get the couples where 95% of the women regularly use porn? I don't know, but they're hardly representative.
Right.
So that's how studies are done. How do you get the headlines you want? How do you get the results you want? You look at the methodology and you go, wow, I'm going to pick a bunch of group. Maybe I'll go to a kink website and ask all the people at the kink website who represent 1% of the population. Maybe they're into BDSM or polyamory. Nothing wrong with that, but maybe that's your cohort. And you ask them, and you have a group where almost all the women regularly use porn on their own. And now you have a completely skewed results. And that's the study they may have tweeted already 10 times since they started their Twitter account back in April. So that's what you see all the time, is you see cherry-picked outlier studies tweeted, then they're represented as, oh, this is what represents the preponderance of the evidence, and then you never get the truth. And then, like what happened to you, you actually tweet them a list of studies. Oh, I don't want to look at those because they're over on YBOP, so
Right.
they're not real.
Right.
So no, they never, ever take on the actual studies. They never address the actual evidence. They never take on the content of the arguments. Instead, because they can't, they have, engaged in defamation, personal attacks, and behind the scenes reporting of people to state boards in order to scare them and silence them, preventing them from speaking. But they are not going to stop me. They are not shutting me down, and they will never silence me. Their attacks only make me want to go at it harder. So guys, if you're listening to this right now and you think you're going to stop me, or you think you're going to take my website, it ain't happening, buddy. It ain't happening.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because that's a big pain in the butt that they're putting you through, and I know.
Yeah, and it's costly. We have to
Sure.
have lawyers, but we're going to pay the lawyers, and if necessary, we'll pay the lawyers for defamation suits. We are not going to be intimidated by this group.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's like it's so frustrating, because it seems like it ties back in a lot of ways to academia, because one of the things I'm constantly running into is guys coming to me having young therapists who are encouraging porn use, and it's like that's what they were taught, and it seems to be like there's this overarching philosophy in academia, particularly in the psychology departments, around porn, like unlimited porn use of any amount and any quantity is good for you. And I don't know where they got the idea. I mean, well, I kind of have an idea around it, but like it's just not working. And the issue, though, then is that there's a lot of then studies, like you said, that are done like this, that are kind of done to back up the conclusions already made, and then they engage in the study to support the conclusion, and it's not providing people with any sort of honest take on reality. And then when they won't even debate you, I mean, I imagine these people, they won't debate you, right?
Well, that's an interesting thing. So it was about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I did a podcast like this, and I forget the guy's name, but underneath the Twitter, on his Twitter account, he posted the podcast. David Lay, David Lay probably,
Right.
The author of The Myth of Sex Addiction, he came over and said, well, if you want real science, why don't you interview me? So this young man said, okay, David Lay, how about you come on with Gary Wilson for a moderated debate for an hour? And so he emailed both of us, and I said, hell yes, I'll do it. And David Lay said, no way, I'm not doing it. Same thing happened to a close ally, a very well-known PhD, Jeffrey Miller. Many of his followers asked him to debate me because he often retweets David Lay's and Nicole Krause's tweets and claims porn's not a problem. He's also made fun of NoFap and people who quit porn regularly. Well, anyhow, he came over and just started defaming me and calling me names and saying, I'm not going to, debate him because he's, a loser. He attacks women. He stalks women. He's, on and on, all these horrible things. And of course, that's how they deal with things. They attack their opponents personally so that they then don't have to actually engage in debate or address the content. It's an old propagandist tactic that they use very well.
Right.
So
right.
No, they will not debate me. They are scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I'll debate any of them anytime.
Yeah, and if any of you guys who are pro porn and you think you've got a strong case for it being healthy and good, well, you're always welcome on here, and maybe I could set you up here, Gary. We could do that moderated debate. I think that'd be wonderful. And to be clear, like, you're not out there condemning people for using porn. You're not trying to get porn banned, as far as I know. You're just talking about the reality of the consequences. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So my background is I'm a libertarian liberal, far left of Bernie Sanders, might make you cringe. And so that's my view. Everyone do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm just trying to educate that there can be negative effects. And that's about it. I certainly don't want to ban it. I think maybe what the UK is going to do is probably a good idea, where you have age verification so that those under 18 can't have free access to porn tube sites. But no, certainly don't want to ban it. So no, you're right.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is like I feel like people are automatically coming into the conversation, at least the ones that I have, and they're hostile toward my stance, is they feel like I'm out there to get them, and it's like, no, you can go ahead and do this as much as you want. I think it's a terrible idea, but go ahead. It's knock yourself out. And I don't understand why that gets them so upset. That's the thing I'm struggling with. And I guess
I was having a conversation last night about this, and I think people really get upset about two things: diet and sex. You see these arguments. Cholesterol is bad for you. Cholesterol is good for you. Eat a bunch of eggs. No, you got to go vegan. Or they see things very black and white. So when we have discussions about sexuality, often it brings up childhood issues. So maybe someone was a sexual minority, someone was gay or bisexual, and they had some harms done to them because of that, psychically or physically. Or people, and we see this a lot, grew up very, very religious, and they felt like they're shamed, and then they become not religious, they became very liberal, and then they have a backlash against that upbringing, and then they project those experiences onto you or me or Alexander Rhodes or anyone who says, hey, porn was bad for me, or porn might have negative effects. So they bring all that junk with them rather than looking directly at what we're saying and the evidence behind it.
Right. And I remember hearing that from someone who was, referring to you as like anti-gay because, I guess there are, gay guys, they felt uncomfortable in their orientation. They found solace in porn, and they feel like you saying that porn could maybe be bad for them is you being like anti-gay, which is, that's not how logic really works. But
and I hate to say this, and I'll say it anyhow. My best friend's gay. My roommate for 5 years back in the 80s was a gay man. My roommate. I went to nursing school. Let's just put some things to rest. I went to nursing school way back when. I was one of the first people to be in hospice care of AIDS patients in San Francisco, taking them to their death. Gay man after gay man after gay man. I took them to their death. So it is abhorrent to me to suggest that I'm anti-gay. And then you talk about the white nationalist crap.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
It came from Nicole Prouse and David Ley, who've been trying to foster this for a long time. They've written an article together, a Psychology Today post, claiming that people who quit porn are fascists, claiming that I'm suggesting that I'm a white nationalist because David Duke one time in 2013 did an article about porn, and he linked to my TED Talk. So they tweet that. They've been tweeting that regularly, that Gary Wilson's a fascist, because David Duke did an article and linked to my, this is what they use. It's crazy.
Right.
I grew up in a black neighborhood. I played basketball all day with black people. Some of my relatives are actually married to black people. It's just insane what these people saying. It's just the opposite of truth. But that's what they do. We've documented it. This is how these people roll.
Yeah, and the guy who was attacking yesterday, who was like, oh, well, he interviewed, this person, the Proud Boys, or Stefan Molyneux, and it's like, just because you talk to someone doesn't mean you agree with everything they say, but also those organizations are not white nationalist organizations, and maybe they're conservative in some ways or another, but like they're not fascist and they're not white nationalist for sure. And I just don't know where this stuff is coming from. It's just insane.
Well, it is. It came from Nicole Prowse and David Lay, who started to tweet that back in 2016. Then they went after NoFap. They would often tweet that NoFap is full of fascists. They're white nationalists. They often suggested Alexander Rhodes was a fascist. So they would just tweet this over and over again, and then they would cause their followers to retweet it. So really, they are actually to the point of endangering us. That's a little bit scary when I have these crazy people coming after me constantly, and as does Alexander Rhodes and others, with these insane accusations. So, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to incite their followers to viciously attack us.
Yeah, and that's like, maybe 5 years ago, I would have been like, okay, I mean, probably don't have too much to worry about. But I mean, it seems to be a connection between, it's a very kind of, you're getting attacked by, people primarily, it seems, on the left. And it's like, now you have people like Antifa, groups like that, who will literally, hurt people. That's what they've been doing. And, you've got people like the nerdy kinky commie, coming out and defaming you and doing all this kind of crazy stuff. It's like, yeah, it's starting to get a little worrisome. And I don't know, just be smart about it. And yeah, I hope that legal action works out well for you and all the other people involved. Luckily, I've missed a decent amount of it, probably just because I'm not as big as you guys. And it's just stay safe, plainly.
Yeah, it is a bit worrying. And I worry about the others involved, and some of them are scared, and some of them have quit talking out because of this harassment, defamation, and personal attacks. When someone has reported you to your state board 3 times trying to get your license taken away, you become concerned. In fact, that same person reported me to the Oregon Psychology Board, even though I'm not a psychologist, and the Oregon Psychology Board sent me a letter, said, you were reported to the board. Of course, we ignored it, but we just want to let you know. Oh, thanks. So this is just really quite something that's going on. And I have a couple of pages, extensive pages, that document much of this behavior on my website. So they're there. I'm not hiding. I believe that sunshine is a good thing. And so I have those pages, so you can find them on my website.
That's great. Yeah. Make sure you guys go check out Your Brain on Porn and stay away from the fake Your Brain on Porn. And if you see them around on Twitter or whatever, go ahead and call them out for the garbage don't call them garbage, but just tell them that they're wrong, because the thing that we're engaged here in a lot of ways is a battle of voices. And ultimately, I think if you stick to good principles of focusing on the truth, honest conversation, like you said, you love sunshine. That's fantastic. I think that's the way that you win. It's when you do this behind the back stuff. Yeah, you might get ahead a little bit, for a little while. You might scare some people off, but eventually the truth is going to win out. So just, share this kind of stuff with the people the people you care about. Tell them the truth about porn and how it's can affect them. And, recommend Gary's site, because it's honestly, it's pretty insane how comprehensively you've documented the issues with porn. Really, you've done a fantastic job with it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have a one site. It's right there on the front page. You can click to it. It's called research page. And so on that research page, I've collected studies into certain lists. So you can click on those lists, and it's the list. And of course, it links right to the study. And it also has excerpts. So you can see multiple lists. And then you can see below even more lists. So I literally have probably about 3,000 to 4,000 studies in separate pages.
Wow.
On my website, organized into various lists that are easily accessible. So yeah, the research is there, but the truth is YBOP didn't start out about the research. It wanted to report on what occurs when individuals give up porn. And so they kept seeing all these benefits. They kept seeing even psychological issues remit, like ADH-like symptoms, depression, anxiety, social anxiety. They saw their sexual function improve, their erectile dysfunction go away. So that's where we started. But we have also moved to listing research and analyzing questionable studies.
Yeah, and it's great because I always just go and refer to you guys whenever I want some honest analysis. Honestly, I wish you had an opponent with some integrity, because I always try and look at both sides of something, but I can't find anyone that's convinced me that they're looking at the data objectively that is pro porn. That's pretty much the issue that I'm running into. So it's like, all right, well, Gary's the only one who's willing to talk to me. He's the only one who's willing to back up his conclusions with studies and things like that. So it's like, clearly you're just, I think, in the right. So I think you're doing pretty good.
What's fascinating is when this real YourBrainOnPorn.com site went up, it listed 25 experts with their pictures and their bios. And if you look closely, about 7, 8, probably about 10 of them do research. And it's those 10 individuals on that site trying to steal my trademark who are the ones who are primarily putting out the studies that supposedly debunk porn as causing relationship problems, or saying that porn addiction is really a religious problem. It's not actually addiction. So it's just really that handful of individuals are the same ones putting out the outlier studies, who now are on a website trying to basically shut me down, to take me off the internet. So it's so much out in the open now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Curious, are any of those experts, are any of them like neurobiologists, or are they all psychologists?
Nicole Prouse says she's a neuroscientist, so that's one. So that's pretty much it in terms of the neuroscientist, and she's the only one listed on the Real YBOP page that has done a neurological study on porn users. What's interesting about her 2 neurological studies, they were EEG studies. So those are brain waves, and they're quite up to interpretation. But she did 2 brainwave studies. Now, I have critiqued those studies, but here's the other thing. 17 there's peer-reviewed papers, and there's 17 peer-reviewed critiques of her 2 EEG studies. And all 17 of those critiques say that her findings support the addiction model. What she really found in her subjects was that they had greater cue reactivity to porn images, but they had less desire to have sex with a partner. So they thought, wow, that cue reactivity is a sign of addiction, and less desire to have sex with a partner is really a big problem.
So she's kind of an opponent. Yeah, so she's kind of an opponent to her own research in some ways, it sounds like.
There's been lots of critiques that really disagree with her conclusions.
All right, so Based upon all this stuff we've been talking about, all the crazy back and forth you've been getting, are there any kind of final thoughts you want to share around this, almost call it like a culture war around porn?
Well, it's just escalated to the point where recently there's been a defamation lawsuit. In fact, there's a couple of articles out about it. Don Hilton, a medical doctor and neurosurgeon, is suing Nicole Prouse for defamation. And that case is down in Texas. So that's gotten quite a bit of press. And so it's really gotten to the point where now lawyers are involved. Like with my case, lawyers are involved to protect my trademark. And so that's continuing. The legal actions are continuing. And this defamation lawsuit from Dr. Hilton to Dr. Prouse will probably get more press as time goes on. So maybe a lot of the activities by the pro-porn groups will be exposed as this defamation lawsuit continues and maybe goes to trial. We'll just have to see about that.
Yeah, that honestly, I feel like there's so much stuff going on with this. It'd be a great documentary. So I don't know if you feel like having someone with a camera follow you around all the time, but this is it's just crazy stuff because, it's just so disconnected from reality, and it's sad to see. But, the big thing here is, I think, the guys who are struggling with the issue, the guys who are really trying to get out of this thing, live better lives. And do you have any kind of final words of advice, maybe resources or strategies or anything you want to leave people with who are, looking to get out of this thing?
People are sometimes desperate and they may try to contact me or tweet at me. And I don't generally respond to those requests because everything I have is on my site and it's pretty well organized. We redid the site to make it easier to access the material, so we have landing pages. And on those pages is all the information we have. And we also have resource pages, and you're one of the people on there, as are others. So they can go to NoFap, they can go Mark Queppet, they can look up Noah Church. If they need coaching, they can see therapists if they believe they need therapists. They can do all the above. So all the information's out there. I think when men first realize, it's mostly men, but now it's women, realize they have a problem, they're looking for some type of magical solution. And you could talk better, talk more to this than I could, a lot better. And there is no magical solution, is there?
No, that's kind of the thing. It's like they're applying porn thinking to solving porn. It's like porn is the quick press the button, problem goes away kind of thing. And we kind of live in a culture where it's like you take a pill, you press a button, and some kind of instantaneous fix is going to arrive at your door, especially if you're willing to pay enough. But like, no matter how much you pay, there is no quick fix to this. You're going to have to go through the process of figuring yourself out, finding better ways to manage your thoughts and emotions, and, figure out what you want to do with your sexuality in your life other than porn, if you really want to quit it. And it's hard work, but it's worth it. And I've, been saying that for years now. It's been tremendously worth it for me. My brain is still improving. My sexuality is still, I feel like, becoming more and more alive and connected to reality, which is crazy considering, I haven't, masturbated to porn for almost 7 years now. And I literally am still getting benefits from it. And I guess for you, you've been collecting accounts of guys doing this for a long time. Can you just assure everyone out there that this is, at least from what you've seen, worth it, a worthwhile sacrifice?
Well, it is. And I think we need to step back at the big picture. My generation didn't have that sacrifice. So if you ask a guy who's in the 60s like me, well, giving up porn, isn't that quite a bit of a sacrifice? And it's like, when I was a teenager, we didn't use porn. We didn't need porn. If the wind blowed, we were ready. We were beyond ready. We had to walk around, in the halls with books in front of us so we wouldn't show how ready we were. So to me, giving up porn has so many benefits and it has no downside. It just has no downside. Yes, you're probably going to feel bad. you might have empty place. Maybe you'll go through a flat line and go, oh my God, now my libido's really dropped. I'm scared. I might not be normal again. Yeah, you're going to go through a lot of roller coaster events, but there's really no upside to porn. You know, they often say, well, porn is educational. Really? You want to get your sex education from porn? Oh, I might learn new things. Really? You're going to learn from porn? Well, if you want to learn about sex, maybe watch a video that's about sexual techniques. Maybe read a book about sexual techniques. Here's the concept. Maybe talk to your partner. Whoa, no, you can't believe it. Ask them what they like and do it. So there's all sorts of ways that humans before internet actually figured out sex and had a good time. So there really is no downside.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. So thank you so much for coming on, Gary. It was really great to have you and catch up a little bit with you and hear about, the science and all the kind of crazy stuff going on behind the scenes. And yeah, is there any kind of final thought you want to share where other than, check out yourbrainonporn.com? Go ahead and let it go.
Yeah, I don't really have any final thoughts. Do check out yourbrainonporn.com, and it's organized now where you can go to all these different pages. And what the guys who are quitting, who usually watch, they want to read stories. And we have collected 5,000 complete rebooting stories, and they're organized into 3 pages. And then we have the FAQs. So people often ask the same question, as you know. And so we have almost all those regular questions answered. And in those answers, we have comments by men who have recovered or who are recovering, so that you can read their comments about what to do and not to do. So the information's there, it's easy to access, and you could spend a lifetime reading all of the advice from the people who've been there. And some people really get a lot of benefit from that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you highlighted those rebooting accounts that you've collected, because there's been a number of times where I've had clients where they just couldn't believe that they could do it. But then I'm like, all right, go click this link, go here and start reading the accounts, and you start realizing there's hundreds, thousands. There are so many guys who have done this. You can do it. You're not alone. You're not alone, and you can do it. And so I think you've done a fantastic job in helping people recognize that. So thank you again, Gary, for coming. And we'll have to do this. On. Yeah, we'll have to do this again sometime here soon. So, all right, everybody. Thank you. Most guys struggle to quit porn because they aren't building the right habits to replace porn. If you want to learn the simple habit replacement system I've used to help thousands of men quit porn and develop self-mastery, then click the link in the description below and download my free Reboot Regimen guide.